So quickly, let's finish up Bet Shan, the site par excellence for us of the Roman and actually also Byzantine cultural buffet. But make no mistake, Bet Shan is just one of many, many, many huge, monumentally elaborated, very comfortable, large cities throughout this territory. There are lots. Cheek by jowl. This is an urbanized period. All throughout the land, on the coast and in the interior, are big cities similar to this. So I actually what did we do about Bet Shan so far? I can't actually remember. Sorry about that. Maybe I'll move this. Did we talk about this city at all? A little bit? What did we talk about? Somebody tell me. And did I show you all those things, or did we just talk about them? I showed them? So we'll just quickly review. We've got, we're looking down from the tell at the city that was built up in the Roman period below. In the Hellenistic period, there was a settlement. You have your plan of Bet Shan that I handed out last time? Someplace? You have that? Look on the plan, the side that is got the whole city. And where is number 5 on this plan? Oh, there it is, Tel Istaba. So on the city plan that you have, look towards the upper right. You'll see Tel Istaba, and you see a number 5 there. Did you find that? Yes. Okay. That's where the Hellenistic town is. It's on a mound. Probably it was walled. I don't think they've got the wall yet, but it was probably walled. And it's at some distance from here. So it was small. It was a village, and it was probably fortified. In the Roman period, after Pompey in 63 founds the Roman province of Syria, a new town was laid out right below the ancient mound. And that's the town, the city center of which is on the backside of that big plan that you have. Because this is a period in which people don't need to live within walls for defensive purposes. So they can have these wide open spaces. And you see the colonnaded street and the temple here that was at the intersection of the two main streets. Did we show you these already? So colonnaded street number 1, and the steps of the temple, the monumental steps, the black basalt of the streets, and then the white limestone to mark off the temple. You see some of the columns that have fallen over in the 8th century. There was an earthquake here. All the columns fell over. The huge bath complex, which you see here in aerial view, behind one of the colonnaded streets. This is one of the other colonnaded streets here, with its shops behind. This enormous bath complex with a huge hot room hall, and these are the hypocausts, which are the pillars that hold up the raised floor. So the water underneath here was heated by ovens. You can see some of the ovens, and then this was all a giant sweat room because it was very hot. Like all good Roman cities, as we have now been talking about, there was a big entertainment There were sets of entertainment buildings. The amphitheater is on your plan down towards the bottom, near where it says Modern Town. You see where it says number 11 down there? That was originally a circus. In the Roman period, it was a circus, and then in the 4th century, it was actually turned into an amphitheater. And where these people are walking around is the amphitheater. You get so you know what the difference is. Amphitheaters for gladiatorial games, like what's that movie? Gladiator. That's the movie, right? With Russell Crowe, right? Yeah. And the other ones are for the chariot races. So in the 4th century, the circus was converted here into an amphitheater. Very nice. And a theater, huge, capacity about 7,500. 2 tiers of seats, only the lower tier has been restored. The upper tier in ruins, so you just can see the supports for them, but you have to imagine seats going all the way up to the top. So there was a balcony area, which you could get to directly, a ramp through ramped entryways here, very efficient Roman-style seating. And here's the back end of the theater. It's a Roman-style theater, built up from the ground, not built into a hillside like the theater at Sepphoris. Oh, this reminds me to tell you that on the website, on Blackboard, on the class website, on excavation links, or whatever that button is for where I put links to site pages, I put a whole bunch of more new site links. 2 to Bet-Shan Scythopolis, and then to various of the synagogue sites that we've looked at. I think I have one to Chorzin. I think I have one to Baram. There's one to Capernaum, which we'll be getting to hopefully in about 10 minutes. So you should check that out, and you can get a lot more details about these various sites on those links, which might be helpful to you when you're working on your last paper. So, all right. So you can see the setup of the theater and the city center in relation to the mound. Yeah. So the theater is oriented looking at right out towards the main part of the city, which is directly below the mound here. And in fact, that main colonnaded street coming up from the theater is oriented smack towards the center of the ancient mound. Today, if you go there, it looks like this. Only one side of the colonnade is standing. The street itself, all of the streets are actually a standard size, which I wrote down here somewhere. But now I don't know where I wrote it down. Oh, here it is. They're 38 meters across, wide. They're 12 meters across, and then there's 6 meter deep sidewalks, and then there are the shops on either side. So you have to imagine these really monumental thoroughfares. And in antiquity, it would have looked like this. And in considering the various manifestations of identity, not identity, how you, whether you choose to differentiate yourself from somebody or not that we were talking about here, I find this very interesting because, of course, it's totally on purpose. It's no accident. You might think, actually, that it looks a little wacky to have your biggest main colonnaded street look like it comes to a flat dead end at this gigantic mound. So what you have to think is, why, in fact, did the city fathers think that this was such a good idea to build it this way? And you have to wonder if the people who lived here, not having any specific way to pull out. No famous event happened here that that was recorded, especially so that you could have some landmark to commemorate that. It's not in one of these topographically discrete zones. It's not in Philistia, it's not in Judea, it's not in Samaria, it's just at the end of this long big valley that was never really a part of anything in particular. It was swept up into the province of Roman Syria in 63. There's no, in other words, geographical distinctiveness, especially about this. And this city plan must have been, I think, devised to take advantage of the one aspect of singularity that this place had, which was an obvious emblem of a deep past. And that obvious emblem is the mound itself. Not that anybody here was an archaeologist or an historian. Not that there was any excavation on there. That it wasn't the point of what it really was like. It's the point that everybody knew that that was a really old place. Big and old, and that's what it symbolized. And obviously the people who planned this are using that as part of the as part of the draw and part of the attraction of the way that they lay out their town. So here you see an aerial view of the town from the other direction now. Here's the theater. Here's that colonnaded street. Here's that giant bath building. Here's the main colonnaded street, Palladius Street, and the mound itself dominating the city center. All right. So we're just this one little corner of the Roman world. This is the empire as it was at its maximum extent in, actually, this is right around the year 100. Well, it's about 130 if you have Palestina, but Mesopotamia was already a province then, but forget that. Okay. But in the course of the 3rd century AD, things got very messy in the Roman world. They didn't get messy for us, per se. Nothing actually bad was had. There weren't any big battles or wars. But there was a huge amount of political fragmentation, lots of conflict, all of which you can learn about if you take a Roman history class, a little bit you can learn about if you take a Roman archaeology class. Let me just say, to cut to the chase, that one of the Roman emperors in the latter part of the 3rd century decided to divide the entire Roman Empire up into 4 zones for easier governing. And there would be 4 people in charge, and each people would have a zone. And this worked for about 30 years, or maybe more like 20 years. There was somebody in charge of this area, and somebody in charge of the purple area, and somebody in charge of the sort of cantaloupe-colored area, somebody in charge over here. 4 different people. But that didn't work out so good. Eventually, there were fights between them. And then eventually, in the early part of the 4th century, there came to be one person in charge in the west and one person in charge in the east. That should remind you of another period that we studied, which is the 1st century BCE, when Caesar and Pompey were fighting between the west and the east, and then eventually Octavian and Mark Antony were fighting between the west and the east. And the divide is more or less the same now. And the person who was in charge of all the peach and the cantaloupe-colored areas was Constantine. And he came from Britain, that's where he was born, and brought his army and eventually came to and took over Rome. And when he did, in a battle just outside of Rome, in the very early years of the 4th century AD, right before that battle, he converted to the religion that up until then had been only practiced underground and in private and by by groups of people out of the mainstream of Roman life, and that religion was Christianity. And on his on the eve of this big battle before he conquered the city of Rome, he declared that he would prevail in the name of Christ. And when he did, he declared Christianity, which up until then, like I say, had been this sort of underground cult. Not the official religion of the Roman world, but just an accepted religion. Yet another way of worshiping that would be protected in the Roman world. So here you see Constantine himself, head, a sculpted head, and here he is on a coin. And on the other side of the coin, the symbol under which he said he made this conquest, Chi, Rho, the two Greek letters, which are the first two letters of the name of Christ in Greek. And then he decided that he would venerate the birthplace and the burial place of Jesus with official buildings for people to come and worship. So the birthplace is Bethlehem, and a large basilical church was built in Bethlehem, and the place of Jesus' death and burial was Jerusalem. And to Jerusalem, Constantine sent his mother, Helena. She was his emissary. He was busy. He was still wrapping up a few battle events up in the area of modern-day Turkey. So Helena comes to Jerusalem in the year 326. And in the city of Jerusalem, Jews were not living, but Christians were already living. There were Christians living in various places around the country. Christians were living here. And there was, in fact, for the community of Christians here, a bishop. His name was Macarius. And Bishop Macarius told Helena that the place where Christ had been buried was known by tradition to the community here. And that place was right there in the corner of the Forum. Now, the Forum, of course, was this huge paved area, and in this corner of the Forum was what? What's in this corner of the Forum? Temple to who? Folks? What's in this corner of the Forum? Almost. In her Latin form. Correct. It was a girl, a girl god, and the girl god is Venus. That's right. So there's a temple to Venus right there in the corner of the Forum. How could it be that there could be a burial place right here? This is within the city proper. People are not buried within the city proper. And they haven't been for, since before this period. You don't bury people outside the settled area of the city. If there's walls, you bury them outside the walls. This is inside the city. But in the period when the city, this part of the city was enclosed in walls, that site that you just looked at is here. So this wall is built in the time of the revolt in the 1st century, or maybe shortly before that. And this wall is built on the eve of the revolt. So by the middle of the 1st century CE, this was enclosed within walls and could no longer be a burial spot. But the community of Christians, and at this period you could call them Judeo-Christians, that lived in Jerusalem had as a tradition this was the place where Christ had been crucified and buried. Excavations in this area have shown, this is not actually in that spot, but they have shown burials like this. There's bedrock. The bedrock is carved away, and there are carved out chambers, tomb chambers, exactly of the sort that Judeans were buried in the latter part of the 1st century BCE and the 1st century CE. That is what is below that level of that area. So here you see a section drawing of the spot that the bishop told Helena was where Christ had been buried, and she ordered an enormous deconstruction project initially, and the temple of Venus was dismantled, and the paving of the forum was removed, and meters of dirt were cleared out, and burial caves were found. And in fact, tradition records that Helena, who is sometimes called the world's first archaeologist, retrieved from one of these tombs a piece of wood which she identified as a fragment of the cross that Christ was, upon which he was crucified. So there was this burial area that was discovered immediately below the area that had been the platform of the temple of Venus and the forum that Hadrian had built, which you see here in this drawing as at this level right here. And then in this exact spot, a large rotunda was built over the actual burial, and then a building over the area where much of that part of the forum had been. And here it is in section. The rotunda was called in Greek the Anastasis, which means the place of rising or coming up. And it has come down to us in English as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holy burial place. Although the burial place is here underneath the rotunda, and originally under Constantine the church is over here in this part of the drawing. So the interior of the church is an enormous columned hall with a high central nave and an apse at the back, and you see it in this section of the plan here. 5 rows, a large central row, a big apse, a large atrium at the front, steps from the main street, from the Cardo, 3 doors, and then an open courtyard behind the church apse, and then the huge rotunda in the middle of which was a shrine that was built over the burial spot of Jesus. And here it is in a drawing. And you can see that in this drawing, here's the area of the forum, Hadrian's Aelia Capitolina Forum. And whereas before there had been a temple to Venus right here looking out onto and dominating the forum, the church, the basilica, the rotunda, the atrium, and the doorways are oriented immediately off of the main street, the Cardo. And the forum is just turned into, I mean, it looks like a parking lot in this drawing. You know, it's this great big open paved area closed off by the long sidewall of the Anastasis rotunda and the basilical church. The idea for this huge commemorative dome of the Anastasis comes directly from Rome. Here you're looking at the rotunda of the Pantheon in Rome, a large temple that was quite ironically built by Hadrian. And to give you a sense of the scope and the feeling of being inside a structure like this, this is a drawing by the 19th century Italian artist Panini of being inside the Pantheon. And you see that there's an opening in the top of the dome, just like there was probably an opening in the top of the dome of the Anastasis. Columns, and then two levels of interior colonnades, similar to that inside the Pantheon. Of course, inside the Pantheon there were niches with statues surrounding, and inside the rotunda of the Anastasis there was none of this because the focus was on this structure that was built immediately over the burial place. The plan of the Pantheon in toto had a huge dome, which was, in essence, the temple. It was a temple to all the gods, hence the name, Pantheon, temple to all the gods. And then an enormous open area in front. This is where people gathered. Because in Roman religion, people were on the usually outside, and in Greek religion too, on the outside of a structure. And there would have been sacrifice or ceremonies on the outside, and it was the facade that was the most important thing. That was what you looked upon and were impressed by when you were in this large open space in front of the temple. This template is what is adopted by Constantine, but, oops, I forgot I was going to do this, but reverse. Okay, hold that thought. So here's the area of the Forum. Again, the area of the Forum, and what Constantine does here is take up half the Forum with the church, which is then oriented to the Cardo. Oh, come on. Where's that other? Maybe I was just going to say this back here. I'll go back here. So that Pantheon template is similar to what Constantine has done here, but instead of having a huge gathering, this being a huge gathering place on the outside, that area is turned into the church itself. So all the action now is on the inside. Because there are a lot of religions, and not just one. There are a lot of religions, and for each of them, they had their own kind of structure, their own building, and you went inside of it where you were with the other people who worshipped as you did and believed what you did, and together you had whatever service you were going to have. It was not communal, where people gathered on the outside in the way that, for example, people could gather on the outside of the Pantheon in Rome. Each place had to have its own, each group had to have its own place, and you would go inside, and then you would have your services. So the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, built and dedicated in the early 4th century, joins a buffet of other sorts of religious structures and places of worship. Temple of Zeus at Pantheon, Temple of Baal Shemin at Kadesh, the synagogue at Bahram. And it became a place that Christians came to even before it was dedicated. This is a graffito that was discovered when there was some construction work being done on the interior of the church and the foundations of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And it was etched onto a foundation stone that had been covered over by the time the basilica was dedicated in the year 335 CE. So in between 326, when construction began, and 335, when the building was dedicated, somebody drew this. It's a ship. The mast is lowered, so the ship may be at port, or perhaps the mast was damaged. And there is a graffito in Latin, Domine ivimus, Lord, we have come, which may be an allusion to the first words of Psalm 122, which in Latin, in the Vulgate, which is the way that the psalm would have been understood in the Roman West, says, In domum Domine ivimus, let us come to the house of the Lord. Who is coming? Somebody from pretty far away, because it's in Latin, which is not the first language of anybody who lives in this part of the world. So pilgrims from the West in the early 4th century have heard about this new construction event and are already coming to Jerusalem as a site of pilgrimage. Okay, see you next time.